Hi, this is Luann with Rockin Book Reviews. I'm so happy to be here today with Caitlin Billings. Caitlin, you have a wonderful book here, and we'll get into that later, but you're a very interesting person, and I want everybody to get to know you. Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood growing up, where you grew up, and how many siblings and so forth?
Sure. I grew up in Humboldt County, California, which is very far north. And I was born in the 70s in Berkeley, and my parents' mom and later my adopted father moved me up to Humboldt when I was very young. And I grew up there. They went on to have 2 more children, so I have 2 younger siblings. And yeah, it was an interesting childhood, kind of lots of nature, you know, beaches, ocean, everything really clean and cold, and you know, cows grazing on the side of the highway, and also like kind of 80s pop culture was in there. So Madonna and Cyndi Lauper, I remember listening to them on like the playground and as a little kid at school. So it was a very interesting upbringing, and you know, being the eldest of 3 kids, also the only one adopted by my adoptive father, just kind of made for an interesting childhood, and did cause me some stress growing up.
So can you share with us a couple of key events that in your life that has had an impact on you?
Well, I think the first would be to be adopted. Up until that time, I knew I had a birth father and that he wasn't in my life, but I didn't understand completely that he was choosing not to be a part of my life until he gave up his parental rights to my adoptive father. And so I think at that time I got very clear that this was an intentional choice. I think which caused me a lot of angst. And, you know, growing up in the 80s, we didn't talk about adoption very much. We didn't talk about a lot of things. And so my family just didn't have a very clear story about how we came together as a family. It was just sort of like, we did it and we moved on. So there was that. I also was an exchange student in Mexico. I did a gap year after my senior year of high school. I was a young senior. I was 17 when I graduated. And so, you know, I was still very young-minded at the time. And so that was very formative. I left my culture, I left my family, I left my boyfriend, and I was in rural Chiapas at the beginning. And it was also during the Zapatista uprising. So it was not a very safe place to be. I remember checkpoints, you know, guarded by the Mexican military, being told that if we didn't stop, they would shoot all of us. It was really intense. It was a war zone, is what it felt like. And so I really didn't have any understanding of the political stuff that was going on. I just knew that it was scary and there were men with guns kind of everywhere. So they moved me to the Yucatan Peninsula, and I lived there in the capital city, Merida, for about 6 months. And it was very difficult for me at that point. I was a very different young person from a lot of the young people there. In terms of being intellectual and kind of not wanting to party a lot. Like I just didn't want to use substances, and that was very much a part of the culture at the time. And it was here too. I just had sort of alternative friends, you know, but I couldn't find those. So also there was just very rigid and defined gender roles for boys and girls. And I really resented and chafed at that, because in my country, I graduated from high school and I was considered an adult. I had freedom to do what I wanted, go where I wanted. And in Mexico, I was very much considered a girl to be protected.
Probably did need it in Mexico.
Huh?
You probably did need protection in Mexico.
Well, come to find out, I did. And I found myself in a situation at a party where the kids had been drinking, and there was this young man there, and had an unwanted sexual encounter with him that really put a difficult spin on the whole trip, and was something I struggled with for quite a long time in my life. So those were really the first formative experiences, and I've had others, but those really shaped my outlook on life. And in some ways, I think have given me the social justice perspective that I have now. And going away and leaving my culture really caused me to look at difference as well as similarity. And I feel like I have more insight into both my country as well as what other people experience around the world.
I had a similar situation with experiencing living in the Philippines, where they have Tagalog and they have 148 dialects of
Mm.
and it was very difficult. But yes, it was a eye-opener of how a lot of third world countries have struggle and the poverty. I mean, we don't know any poverty compared to theirs here in the United States. It doesn't sound like you had a real joyful childhood.
I think in some ways I did. I was fortunate enough to have a mother who very much believed in my need to express myself, and she enrolled me in after school theater when I was a young person, like a middle school person. And then I did theater and singing in high school, and I had a really great group of close friends in my senior year. So I really was able to keep a lot of the magic of growing up in Humble, kind of the innocence that I felt in a lot of ways there, and kind of combined with the tragedy that I considered my life to be by not having my birth father in my life. And then going on to really begin to understand that I struggled with depression, which was, evolved kind of after coming back from Mexico.
It's heartbreaking. In your memoir, you get really personal. I mean, you really open yourself up. I think it's very brave that you did that. Can you tell us a little bit about your book and what inspired you to write it and how difficult it was?
Well, writing has been probably my oldest, dearest friend. I was writing I can't even remember when I started. So it was a very familiar form for me to turn to after some difficult events. And those were basically, I was held up at gunpoint here in the Bay Area in California, which was, a very frightening experience. I really thought I was going to be shot and potentially die. I managed to escape, which is wonderful, and nobody was hurt. But I didn't realize that I was hurt psychologically and that I developed PTSD. But I was a therapist. I am a therapist, and I didn't seek treatment. I told myself that, you know what to do. This will pass. It's not that big of a deal. Other people have it so much worse than you do. You have so much privilege. It was just an attempted mugging, if even that, like, get over it. And so I got worse and worse and worse and was hiding it and not telling anyone until I broke down at my doctor's office, and she put me on kind of she called a lightweight antidepressant. And I had a very strong reaction to the antidepressant and began to experience what now I understand would be called mood cycling, which means that I went from feeling really, really, really happy, loving everybody around me, to suddenly like depressed and planning my suicide. And I had struggled with depression. I knew kind of how to manage that, but this was like a whole new animal. And I felt like I was really at the mercy of it. And I didn't even know to talk about it. It was like I was just kind of surviving day by day in these mood swings. And ultimately that ended with an attempted suicide and a hospitalization. And that was another very jarring experience, because here I was, thinking I had it all together and I didn't need to worry about it and I knew all the things and whatever. I'm a therapist sitting in a psychiatric ward. How did I get here? How did it come to this? So when I got home, after about a year, I had gone on and off medication unsuccessfully. I just started to write about it. And it wasn't like I had an intention to write a memoir. I didn't at all. it had to come out in some way. And so I began doing that. And I had, like some essays that I had written just for myself. I found an online writing community that is very professional and has many writing groups for writers of all genres. And so I kind of found my way into some memoir groups about a year into just kind of posting my stuff and getting feedback. And from there, I was invited to critique other authors' work, and I began critiquing probably 5 chapters a week of other people's memoir chapters, and they would critique mine. So I would end up with 5 people having critiqued 1 chapter so I could make revisions. And I just went on, creating a chapter, and it was like the best thing that ever happened, because I'm one of those people, or I had been, that would start a book, have this brilliant idea and start a book, so excited, and then it would fall by the wayside and I'd never look at it again. So I had like this collection of very sad beginnings of books. And now suddenly I had a rough draft of a manuscript. And so just the support of that writing community, and that they believed in me, I believed in them. So several of us have gotten published now. So it was an unintended journey that ended with an intention to put it out in the world.
Was it scary? I mean, to open yourself up that way to the public? To the
public, yes. I didn't feel scared to open up to other writers, I guess, because I trusted my group. We trusted each other. I don't know. That's been something that I've always kind of been known for in my life, in my family, and then later on as a friend in my friend groups, which is that I'm really not afraid to stand up in front of people and say what I think. Not in a confrontational way, but in a like, here, I'll tell you all about me, vulnerability kind of way. Like, I'll be the first person to kind of crack that open, so that, and then other people will join in. So, growing up performing and doing theater, I was very used to having an audience, I think. So maybe it wasn't as brave as maybe for other people who hadn't had those experiences. But it's still, I've definitely had my like nights of not being able to sleep, wondering what the hell I've done.
Because you're real vulnerable when you open yourself up that way.
Yeah.
Okay. You are a licensed clinical social worker specializing in deep trauma therapy. What is deep trauma therapy?
I think that was sort of my way of doing a succinct explanation of what I do. But trauma therapy pulls from a lot of different therapies created for people who have either PTSD or are on the spectrum somehow of having experienced a trauma and it affecting their life in some way. That can show up in dissociative disorders, as PTSD, as borderline personality disorder, etc. And there are a lot of different treatment modalities to take care of people in that way and teach them skills and support them and walk beside them. And the skills that I use, or the trainings that I've done, would be EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, dialectical behavior therapy. And right now I'm learning more about somatic therapy, as well as something called internal family systems. And that's another approach that I find blends really well with EMDR, because it's very body-based. So we're not just in our executive functioning of our brain, but we're engaging with our entire brain, which holds memory, it holds emotion, it holds fight or flight, our nervous system. It's connected in all ways to our body on a cellular level. So really learning more about how to support people to drop into their body if they've numbed out for a really long time, so they've been disconnected from their body, or how to manage the alarm bells that are constantly going off in their body because of their trauma, and because their nervous system is maxed out and it's like, I'm sensitive to everything. Everything feels like a threat, or everything is overly emotional, or everything makes me want to hide. And then IFS is really, some people call it parts work. And what parts work is, we all have parts, right? We all have different pieces of our personalities and of our experience that represent different experiences we've gone through, different ages. Like you asked about, what were the things that formed me? What were formative experiences? We all have those. And in trauma, sometimes those can either become so separate that it feels like we're fighting with parts of ourselves, or they can become so mixed up that we feel confused, or we feel like we're not sure what we want, or we still feel that inner conflict, but we don't know why. That would be somebody who could do some parts work in terms of like pulling the parts apart a little bit and looking at like, okay, so this response is attached to my child self when I was 8 years old. And this traumatic event really, happened and really frightened me. And I've been trying to protect that child part with this other adult part of myself for a really long time. But this adult only knows how to use substances to take care of this child. So who else, can I bring in who can nurture this adult that's using substances so that they can let go of that? So it's that kind of work within one's self. Okay, I could talk about this forever.
The EMDR is relatively new.
Yeah.
Can you put it in a nutshell? To me, it feels more like a type of almost hypnotic, state that they put you in. But can you kind of explain it a little bit for those who don't know what it is?
Yeah. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, because it was originally created using eye movement as what we call bilateral movement that stimulates both sides of the brain. So as EMDR has progressed, they've found that really any kind of bilateral movement can help to process memories that might be fragmented in your mind, might be stuck in some way, might be, repeating, like playing on repeat when something happens, doing flashback kinds of things, nightmares, dissociating. So basically, the idea is that you stimulate both sides of the brain while exposing the client to the material that they present in therapy. And there's a whole process to it, which I'm not going to get into right now. But the idea is that you are getting both sides of the brain going, which is something that happens in REM sleep when we sleep. It's when we dream. And so they found that, REM sleep being a bilateral movement, because your eyes go back and forth really fast. If you've ever watched somebody in REM sleep, their eyes are moving back and forward and all over the place. So by simulating REM sleep in the EMDR context, we are beginning to integrate those memories and then desensitize them. So it's that repeated exposure. Okay, we're going to go back. What are you noticing now about that memory? What are you noticing now about your body? And then we're going to do some more work, desensitize, and reprocess simultaneously, allowing your mind to go wherever it needs to go in order to have a natural process of reintegration rather than like that frozen, stuck feeling that so many can have when they're in a trauma.
So when they ask you a question and they're going and you're watching the hand movement,
yeah,
that stimulates that
both sides of the
internal.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's really interesting. I've got a friend that does that, and I've gone a few times, but I don't know yet. It kind of reminds me when I went to a hypnotherapist once, and he tried to hypnotize, and it didn't work. But
and people get confused and they think that I'm hypnotizing them, and I'm very clear with them that that's not what this is. There's no hypnotism involved. And some people find the eye movement uncomfortable, or it just doesn't work for them. So there are other ways that you can do the bilateral stimulation. You can tap your legs back and forth. You can tap across your body back and forth. You can listen to music and in one ear, back and forth. There are like what they call like little buzzers that you can hold in your hand, specifically designed for EMDR, and the buzz will go back and forth between the two hands. So it was created with eye movement, but not everybody can do that. Like I can't.
So the important part is just the back and forth. It's got to, in order to stimulate those memories and emotions and those things that we suppress.
Exactly. Yeah.
How much success rate have you had with this?
That's a hard question. I've had clients who I worked with maybe for 6 months to a year who were able to pretty much clear most of their trauma out to the point that they felt like they could go into situations now that had those elements and they wouldn't be triggered by it. They might notice, oh, that's kind of the same sound, that happened when I was in that car accident. But I know it's not the car accident happening and I'm not suddenly there. I have other clients that I've worked with for a couple of years, and because their trauma is so layered, and because it started so early in childhood, even in the womb, it's taking longer. There's so much work we have to do to identify the parts of who they are, to make sure that they feel safe entering into these traumatic memories. And there's a lot of exercises and work that we can do with that before we even start talking about trauma.
So it's actually better if you start younger with this type of therapy,
Well, yeah.
or you don't have so many layers of problems.
One could say that, although I think the longer we're alive, the more traumas we accumulate.
That's true.
And I don't know that to just, it's not like your brain heals completely and it's like you never had the trauma. It's
Right.
still there. It's not gone, but it's desensitized and processed enough through today, like today's lens, that you now have a greater understanding of the trauma. You're not just in it, re-experiencing it over and over again.
A few years ago when I first heard about it, but I had been having a lot of health issues.
Yeah.
And one of my friends that went through a class, it was like a seminar, and she bought the book and she studied the book and so forth. And she said she stopped being sick physically.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that if you have emotional things that you're suppressing, it can actually keep you from getting well physically.
Yes, absolutely. I think the flip side of that is sometimes I have people who come to me wanting to heal a physical ailment, and I can't guarantee that.
Right.
So the body holds the trauma just as much as the brain, it's all connected. So there definitely are somatic symptoms and conditions that are created from trauma. What I can't predict for someone is, will it disappear completely like for your friend? Or will there always be a scar that they still have to monitor because sometimes it can get a little inflamed? Or I've had clients with digestive issues, for example. They've done EMDR and had vast improvement, but they still have to have a lifestyle change. They still have to, eat certain foods. They still have a medication that they take to make sure that things stay healthy. So it's like a simultaneous approach for many. Some people are lucky though, like your friend.
I think it's really interesting because it makes sense. Your mind is marvelous organ of your body. I have a friend that is a son of a chief in Samoa. As a chief's son, he's had to learn to swallow swords with fire and walk on hot coals and all this stuff. And he does it through mentally prepare himself when every time he does one of these, he just performs in Las Vegas. And every time he does a show, he has to really concentrate and meditate. And then he can walk on hot coals and he can swallow that sword. And, it's just amazing to me what the mind can do. So if it can do that, it makes sense that if there's something that you have put up a wall blocking, that it could make.
Definitely. And for some people, they might be using substances to deal with their trauma. And we have to approach the substance use first. We can't even get into the trauma, really. I mean, we can talk lightly about it, but we're not going to do a deep EMDR dive into that. We have to figure out how to help them get sober and get stable so that we can then begin to do that work. So it can take years sometimes, depending on what's happening in the client's life, how willing they are to stop using substances, a variety of things, how much trauma they have. Were there resilience factors at play as they were growing up? Did they have a supportive adult in their life that they could turn to no matter what, right? Or were they really all alone? All of these things matter.
No, it's just really interesting. And I really press. So already you're an award winner with your book. And I think that's fantastic. You're an award winner and had a lot of effect in a lot of people's lives. And you have a giveaway for us, correct?
Yes, we do have a giveaway and a gift of you being able to read the prologue. So go to my website, CaitlinBillings.com, to get your gift.
So we will have opportunity for a U.S. Canada winner to receive a print copy, as well as more giveaways on Caitlin's site.
Yep.
That'll be fantastic. Before we close, do you have any further comments?
I do. Yes, I think it was brave for me to be so revealing, especially because I'm in a profession that's in a helping capacity. I'm supposed to have knowledge about treatment and humans, how to treat humans. And I think as I've really looked at why did I release this book? Why did I feel so compelled to talk about this? I think I've really got in touch with the fact that it's important that we all realize that we're imperfect humans. And just because I have, initials after my name or certain degrees doesn't mean that I haven't experienced or had the human experience suffering. We all have. And so I really want people to know and understand that they don't have to be perfect. And if you need help, that's fine. Like, seek it out. Because, as Marsha Linehan says, she's the woman who created dialectical behavior therapy. She talks about creating a life worth living. And if your life is not worth living for you right now because you do need help and you don't know how to reach out, or you're afraid that you're going to be judged or shamed or whatever it is, that's why I wrote this book, is to say, hey, look at what happened to me. I'm a therapist. I'm not perfect. And that's okay.
The book is In Our Blood by Caitlin Billings, and I encourage everyone to read it. It's a fantastic opportunity. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Luann.
And we hope that you all will search the universe through books. Goodbye now.